Imagine failing the most important exam of your life 4 times. Now imagine that after the 4th failure, you have a fever that lasts for weeks. And in that fever, you have a vision. An old man in golden robes appears to you. A younger man stands beside him. And they tell you something that changes everything. You are not just a failed scholar from a poor family in southern China. You are the younger brother of Jesus Christ. You have been chosen. You have a mission. Most people would dismiss this as a fever dream. Hong Xiuquan did not dismiss it. He believed it. And what he did next killed 36 million people. This is the Taiping Rebellion, the deadliest civil war in human history. A conflict that lasted 14 years, consumed an empire, and reshaped the course of Chinese civilization. And almost nobody in the West knows it happened. To understand Hong Xiuquan, you need to understand the world that produced him. China in the 1840s was an empire in quiet crisis, the Qing dynasty, ruled by the Manchu minority over a vast Han Chinese population, had been the dominant power in East Asia for 2 centuries. But cracks were forming. The Opium War of 1839 to 1842 had exposed the empire's military weakness to the entire world. Britain had defeated China with a fraction of its forces. The humiliating Treaty of Nanjing had forced China to open its ports, pay massive reparations, and cede Hong Kong. The myth of Qing invincibility was gone. In the countryside, the damage went deeper. Floods, crop failures, and the economic disruptions of foreign trade had pushed millions of peasants into poverty. Tax collectors still came. Landlords still collected rent. The suffering was real, and it had no political outlet. Hong Xiuquan was born in 1814 in Guangdong province to a Hakka family, an ethnic subgroup slightly apart from the dominant Han culture around them. The Hakka were hardworking, tight-knit, and proud. They invested everything in education because education was the only path to power in Qing China. The path ran through the imperial examination system. Pass the exams, enter the bureaucracy, lift your family from poverty. Fail the exams, return to the fields, and carry the shame of wasted potential for the rest of your life. Hong sat the provincial examinations in 1828. He failed. He sat them again in 1836. He failed. He sat them in 1837. He failed. And then, in 1843, he sat them one final time. He failed again. The 4th failure broke something in Hong Xiuquan. He returned home in a state of complete collapse. His family watched him fall into a fever that lasted weeks. He shouted. He wept. He saw things no one else could see. When the fever broke, Hong was a different man. He later wrote down what he had witnessed during the illness. An old man in golden robes had handed him a sword and commanded him to slay demons. A younger man had fought beside him and called him brother. Years later, Hong came across a Christian pamphlet that had been given to him after one of his earlier failed exams. A pamphlet he had never properly read. He read it now, and the pieces aligned. The old man was God the Father. The younger man was Jesus Christ. And that made Hong Xiuquan the 2nd son of God, the younger brother of Christ, sent to China to save his people. This was not a metaphor to Hong. It was literal, absolute, unshakable truth. He began to preach. He baptized his relatives. He formed a small group of followers he called the God Worshippers Society. He declared that the Qing dynasty was a dynasty of demons. The Manchu rulers were not just corrupt, they were spiritually impure, agents of evil that the true God wanted destroyed. He ordered his followers to smash Confucian tablets and burn ancestral shrines. For millions of poor, displaced, desperate people in southern China, the message landed like a thunderclap. By 1850, the God worshippers had grown from a handful of believers into a movement of tens of thousands. On the first day of 1851, Hong Xiuquan declared the establishment of the Taiping Tianguo, the heavenly kingdom of great peace. He named himself the Heavenly King. He declared war on the Qing dynasty. He had an army of 60,000 people. The Taiping movement was not simply a religious cult with weapons. It was a total alternative society with a political program that was, by the standards of 1851, extraordinarily radical. Foot binding, the practice that had crippled women in China for generations, was abolished. Women were declared equal to men under Taiping law. Women could serve in the military, hold administrative positions, own property. Opium was banned completely. Land was to be distributed equally among the people. Education would be universal. These were not incidental details. They were the core of what the Heavenly Kingdom claimed to be. The Taiping army swept northward. City after city fell. In 1853, they captured Nanjing, the great southern capital of China, one of the largest cities on earth. Hong renamed it the Heavenly Capital and made it his throne city. For the next 11 years, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom would rule a territory the size of France, with tens of millions of subjects, its own currency, its own legal code, its own schools. Outside the walls of that kingdom, the war continued. And it was the war, the sheer, grinding, relentless destruction of 14 years of conflict, that produced the numbers that are almost impossible to absorb. Scholars estimate the total death toll of the Taiping Rebellion at somewhere between 20 and 70 million people. The middle estimate is 36 million. Most of them did not die in battle. They died in the famine that follows when armies march through farmland for a decade and a half. They died in the disease that spreads through refugee populations. They died in the massacres that both sides carried out with regularity. Entire provinces were emptied. Cities that had been home to hundreds of thousands of people were reduced to a fraction of their populations. Some regions would not recover their pre-war population levels for 100 years. 36 million people. Compare that to World War I, 17 million dead. The Taiping Rebellion killed more than twice as many people as the entire First World War. In a conflict the West has almost entirely forgotten. By the late 1850s, the war had reached a stalemate. The Taiping could not advance further north. The Qing could not retake the south. And into this stalemate stepped the Western powers, with a choice to make. Britain and France had commercial interests in China. They had just fought the Second Opium War, extracting even more concessions from the weakened Qing. They could see that the Taiping, with their ban on opium and their Christian theology, were in some ways ideological cousins. Early Western observers had even wondered whether the movement might become a Christian empire. They chose the Qing. The reason was simple: the opium trade. The Qing were weak, exploitable, and willing to keep Chinese ports open to British commerce. The Taiping were unpredictable, ideologically driven, and had already made clear they wanted nothing to do with opium. A Taiping victory would be bad for business. An American mercenary named Frederick Townsend Ward organized the ever-victorious army, a Western-led force of Chinese soldiers trained in European tactics, and began fighting alongside the Qing. When Ward died in battle in 1862, a British officer named Charles Gordon took command. Gordon's force, combined with reorganized Qing armies, began systematically retaking Taiping territory. Inside Nanjing, Hong Xiuquan was dying. By 1864, the city was surrounded and starving. Hong had retreated into his palace, increasingly disconnected from military reality, surrounded by yes men, issuing proclamations about divine protection while his people starved. Reports from the time say he refused to surrender, refused to flee. In June of 1864, he died from illness, possibly from eating wild plants to survive the famine inside the walls, possibly by poison. The accounts are unclear. What is clear is that he died before he could see what came next. Weeks after Hong's death, the Qing army broke through the walls of Nanjing. There was no negotiated surrender. No mercy was extended. The heavenly capital fell. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, 14 years after its founding, ceased to exist. And here is the question worth sitting with. Why don't we know about this? The answer is the same answer it almost always is. History is written by those who write it down and distribute it. In the 19th century, the people writing history for a Western audience were Western observers. European wars got European documentation. American conflicts got American memoirs. The Taiping Rebellion produced some missionary accounts, some diplomatic dispatches, some newspaper reports, and then it was filed away. It did not fit the story that the West was telling about the world. The story that said European civilization was the primary engine of history. The story that said what happened in China was background, context, footnote. 50 times more people died in the Taiping Rebellion than in the American Civil War, which was happening at almost exactly the same time. The American Civil War produced a library of books, films, museums, and national memory. The Taiping Rebellion produced barely a sentence in most Western history textbooks. Hong Xiuquan was born in a world that told him a failed exam meant a failed life. He refused to accept that verdict. The thing he built in its place killed 36 million people. He was not a hero. He was not simply a villain. He was a human being who believed something completely, at a moment when millions of desperate people needed something to believe in a system that had given them nothing. Remember the name, Hong Xiuquan. 36 million people paid for it. The least we can do is know it.